to welcome everyone to the IPM speaker series for this month. Thank you all for coming. And today we're going to have an exciting session with the Personalized Medicine Coalition. So the Personalized Medicine Coalition promotes the understanding and adoption of personalized medicine and is a group out of Washington, D.C. with the aim of benefiting patients and health systems. They are working to try and reduce the barriers and support the adoption of personalized medicine through education, advocacy, and evidence development. And one of the reasons we were happy to have them come present here is that Pitt and UPMC have recently joined the Personalized Medicine Coalition. And so we're going to hear from them about their views on personalized medicine and what we can do with our healthcare system to help promote the usage. We have two speakers today who are going to present together. This will be Ed Abrahams, who is the current president of the Personalized Medicine Coalition. The Personalized Medicine Coalition has grown from its original 18 founded members in 2004 to more than 220 members nowadays. Dr. Abrahams received his doctorate in history from Brown University and has taught history and public policy at Brown University and the University of Pennsylvania. Dr. Abrahams worked for 7 years in the US Congress, including as a legislative assistant to Senator Lloyd Bentsen, as an economist for the Joint Economic Committee under the chairmanship of Representative Lee Hamilton, and as an AAAS Congressional Fellow for Representative Edward Markey. Previously, Dr. Abraham was the executive director of the Pennsylvania Biotechnology Association, where he spearheaded the successful effort leading to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania's investment of $200 million to commercialize biotechnology in the state. And Dr. Abrahams will be alongside Daryl Pritchard, who is the Senior Vice President for Science Policy at the Personalized Medicine Coalition. Daryl received his PhD and master's degree in genetics from George Washington University and completed a postdoctoral fellowship at the Children's National Medical Center. He was awarded the first American Society of Human Genetics NHGRI Fellowship in Genetics and Public Policy, where he worked as a legislative assistant in the House of Representatives as well. Before coming to PMC, Dr. Pritchard served as the Director of Policy Research at the National Pharmaceutical Council, and before that as Director of Research Programs, Advocacy and Personalized Medicine at the Biotechnology Innovation Organization. So as I said, Pitt and UPMC have now joined the Personalized Medicine Coalition just recently. We're very excited to learn about what they're doing and hopefully incorporate some of our ideas and some of our hurdles. And so we're happy to hear them speak and have questions at the end. If you have questions at the end, you can put them into the chat, or you can put them, or we will open up for questions at the end. As always, the session is also recorded. So I will hand this over to Ed and Daryl. Thank you.
Adrian, I want to thank you very much for that generous introduction, and also thank you and Jenny for the opportunity to speak to you today about personalized medicine. And I should begin by also thanking you for joining the Personalized Medicine Coalition. We are only as strong as our members, and we seek to represent them in order, as you said, to advance the paradigm called personalized medicine, or sometimes known as precision medicine. The governing assumption of the PMC is that science alone is not going to lead to a paradigm change where precision personalized medicine replaces one-size-fits-all trial and error. And we believe, representing innovators, scientists, patients, providers, and payers, that personalized medicine does represent a better opportunity to provide clinical outcomes to patients, and also to make the health system more efficient and thereby save it money over the long run. So that is our mantra. Daryl, you can help me change the slides as I go. I think you know I can just raise my hand and you can hit the button, as it were. When I tell people that's what we want to do, or especially when I told people in 2004 that that we were trying to promote this idea called personalized medicine, particularly physicians would say to us, well, I always personalize treatment whenever I encounter a patient. And we might still hear that today. The difference is, and we acknowledge that, and that's why I'd like to begin my presentation with this quote from Hippocrates. It is far more important to know what person the disease has than what disease the person has. So he recognized that 2,400 years ago, or 2,600 years ago. But we didn't have the tools. Next slide, please. We didn't have the tools to understand the variability, as Sir William Osler, the father of modern medicine, noted that because no two faces are the same, so no two bodies are alike, and no two individuals react alike and behave alike under abnormal circumstances, we know is disease. And that's common knowledge to almost any patient or physician. But today, we do have tools that we didn't have 20 years ago, or certainly not 120 years ago, never mind 2,000 years ago. And it's just to integrate those tools into modern medicine that we are dedicated to doing. Next slide. We don't believe that that it's going to happen just because, as I said, the science suggests it should. And this is a slide I particularly like because it illustrates the importance, actually, of personalized medicine. This slide shows a slug Googling how to treat a sore throat. And I must acknowledge Daryl found this for us. So his mother comes home and discovers he followed the directions, but it was counterindicated, obviously, for slugs. And she greets a dead slug. So the point is, you got to get it right. And if you don't, medical errors can obviously occur. Whoops. So we define personalized medicine as an evolving field. In an evolving field in which physicians use molecular diagnostic tests to determine which medical treatments will work best for their patients. By combining those tests, and this is what we think differentiates precision medicine from personalized medicine, with an individual's medical history, his or her circumstances, values, healthcare providers and patients can develop targeted treatment and prevention plans. So that, in essence, is our definition of personalized medicine. It's combining targeted therapeutics with really what the patient is desirous of. So what is driving it? In the past 2 decades, there's been a concern to develop safer and more effective drugs, obviously. There's obviously also a need and a desire to find a faster time to cure. And because of the escalating costs of healthcare, we also know that we have to find cost-effective solutions to our healthcare challenges. And it is our contention that personalized medicine can do that. And we will demonstrate later on in this presentation why we believe that better outcomes and cost-effective healthcare are well within our reach. But we understand we need to demonstrate that, because otherwise the system's going to resist the promise of personalized medicine, and we know it does, especially at places outside of academic medical centers, like the University of Pittsburgh. Next slide, please. This slide illustrates the power of personalized medicine. 60 years ago, We talked about the disease of the blood. But when we were able to identify different leukemias or lymphomas, we were better able to treat them. So the diagnosis came first, and then the treatments developed. And we have now gone to an era today where 70% of what were used to be called diseases of the blood are able to be treated. Next slide. That's an example of personalized medicine, how it can change healthcare, as is this slide, which shows how identifying different mutations, targeted therapies can be developed for lung cancers. Next slide, please. This slide illustrates how many new drugs have been developed to treat lung cancer, with the majority of them coming since 2011. And these are biomarker driven, undoubtedly more effective, and have transformed the treatment of lung cancer. One of the things that Daryl will talk about is not all patients that develop lung cancer are getting this treatment, but I'll save that for his presentation later. This is a very important point. We can develop the technologies, we can develop the therapies, but it doesn't mean that patients are going to get them unless we can change parts of the system to make it happen. Next slide, please. In CML, with the introduction of imetinib or Gleevec, we've gone from 31% cure rate to 89%. That's a great example. And next slide, similarly, in breast cancer, Herceptin, the poster child, and it's been on the market for a long time, has also increased the cure rate or the recurrence rate in breast cancer by over 50%. And as more patients get access to it that are eligible for it, we will see even more better clinical outcomes. Next slide. It's not only cancer, however, that personalized medicine has transformed the treatment of diseases. In cystic fibrosis, 90% of patients that present with CF can be treated with different therapies. And you can see in this slide the results of those introductions. I should mention that there are still 10% of cystic fibrosis patients for whom there are no therapies, and these are patients that experience the so-called nonsense mutation, and people are still working to develop drugs that will address that particular mutation. But the idea is linking the biomarker, the diagnostic test, with the therapy to get a better outcome. I think you all know this, but it's important that we see it writ large to understand how we can move forward and getting more of these products on the market by getting more investment in the research, and then finally moving it through the system to clinical adoption. Next slide. One of the problems of introducing personalized medicine is it's often contended that we're talking about more expensive medicine. Well, we actually think if we can make the system more efficient, we will decrease cost, and we will show you some results where that is the case. But it is also the case, and it's often forgotten, that ineffective medicines waste money, and these are extrapolated data from the treatment of different indications with medicines that don't work. It's, I think, too often forgotten that is not only inefficient and ineffective, it doesn't do patients any good, but it shouldn't be accepted as a status quo against which we measure the introduction of targeted therapeutics, which individually may be more expensive, but if they are more effective, they can reduce costs throughout the system. And that's one of the things that we know we need to demonstrate, because there is resistance here to the introduction among payers and providers to the introduction of this new paradigm. Next slide, please. This slide illustrates that chemotherapy, which is a brutal therapy and is not necessarily necessary for patients who don't need it, and who once upon a time, especially before Oncotype DX and MammaPrint were developed, received chemotherapy because there was no alternative, no way of knowing who would have likely recurrence. Whereas today, we do know that with some predictability or some high degree of confidence, who's likely to suffer recurrence. But again, it's not, those tests are not as widely prescribed as we would, especially in some places. Next slide, please. There was a study that showed that if we could analyze who would benefit from warfarin, that we could prevent 17,000 strokes a year. That also would save a lot of money. I don't want to get into the warfarin case very much. I think that's been a disappointment for personalized medicine. But once upon a time, the ability to diagnose who would benefit and who would not from warfarin held great promise. But it does still illustrate the expectation or the hope that integrating diagnostics into therapy would lead to better outcomes and potentially lower costs. Next slide, please. Personalized medicine has really taken off, and this slide it demonstrates its emergence in the market. In 2008, and even before then, when there were even fewer than 5 drugs that were personalized, whereas today there are over 300. PMC tracks these drugs annually based on the labels that FDA approves. And we use this as a proxy to figure out or appreciate the emergence of personalized medicine. And I think this is rather a graphic chart that tells us that something is happening that leads us to believe that we are actually moving into a new era, even though many people may still be skeptical about that. This, by the way, is a study that Daryl does annually by looking at all the labels that FDA approves each year. And I would say that it's gotten to the point where between a fourth and a third of all approvals are for targeted medicines. And that's pretty impressive. Next slide, please. The pharmaceutical industry has understood what I just noted, and they are, contrary to popular opinion, nearly 100% committed to developing the biomarkers for new indications that they are studying, particularly in oncology, where 73% of all oncology drugs in development are coordinated with particular biomarkers. So we know that cancer has been transformed by figuring out how to personalize treatment. And there's no retreat from that effort. Next slide, please. So there are, as I've alluded, many barriers remaining to realizing the promise of personalized medicine, to which I would argue there are very few people who disagree. If you ask people if they want effective targeted treatment or one size fits all which may or may not work. Very few patients are going to say, I prefer the latter. The barriers that remain, though, I'd like to spend a couple seconds before turning it over to Daryl discussing. The first barrier is obviously the most important. Biology is complex. We don't know. There's as you all know better than I, there's no shortage of scientific and product development challenges and understanding the biology, who's going to respond, when, how, when, and where. So that's the number one barrier. So we do advocate for more scientific research. PMC doesn't conduct the scientific research. Where we pick up is where after the science is developed and focus on the space between that science and its delivery to the patient. And we focus in particular on the regulatory world, which in the United States, particularly, I would argue, especially in diagnostics, is confused. We don't have time to get into that confusion, but we're working on trying to make it more rational, protecting innovation, while also ensuring patient safety. The second big challenge is getting coverage and reimbursement for the diagnostic tests that are necessary to introduce personalized medicine. Payers are often skeptical about some of the untested diagnostic tests, and continue to, or even more than in the past, are reluctant to want to pay the high prices that some of the therapies command. And that may be a problem in the future with the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act, which for the first time in the United States will introduce governmental price controls, which may or may not lead to reduced investment on the part of the pharmaceutical industry. It's something we're monitoring and have to consider. Another big challenge is educational, and is getting physicians and other providers to adopt personalized medicine. And Daryl will talk a little bit about that. We have some evidence that adoption is not as easy as we would hope. And then the final barrier for our purposes is to get the public more aware of the potential, so that there will be more willingness to invest in personalized medicine and to overcome some of these challenges. Somebody once told me, we'll know we're in the era of personalized medicine when the patient asks, is this going to work for me? That's essentially where we are headed. So let me stop there, and we'll save time for questions at the end, but turn it over to Daryl for a discussion of our research portfolio. As I indicated in the beginning, we work on 3 tracks. One is to raise the profile of personalized medicine. The second is to advocate for friendlier public policies. And the third, under Daryl's direction, is to do the research that demonstrates that personalized medicine represents a better paradigm. So Daryl, with that as an introduction, let me turn it over to you.
Thanks, Ed. And I also want to thank our host, take this opportunity to thank our host, the University of Pittsburgh Institute of Precision Medicine, especially Doctors Lee and Xavier. And thanks to all of you, our University of Pittsburgh audience, who share our interest in advancing personalized medicine. As I was introduced, I'm Daryl Pritchard. Just reintroduce myself real quickly, Senior Vice President of Science Policy at the Personalized Medicine Coalition. To follow Ed Abraham's comments on barriers, making the case for personalized medicine, and the commitment by various stakeholders to developing and advancing the field, Here at PMC, at the Personalized Medicine Coalition, after making the case for personalized medicine for years, we're now saying often that the case has been made for personalized medicine, meaning that most key stakeholders now recognize the value of personalized medicine strategies for improved healthcare, at least in some areas, especially those areas that Ed had mentioned, breast cancer, cystic fibrosis, and such. Researchers, industry, innovators, and regulators, as well as patients, are increasingly on board for the personalized medicine paradigm. So our attention has become more focused on the stakeholders that control access to personalized medicine technologies, the payers and healthcare providers. The PMC's research portfolio is designed to reach all stakeholders, including the research community, but payers and providers in particular, because this is the touch point which we now face. The research portfolio includes initiatives that will help build and communicate a greater understanding of personalized medicine, inform policy decision-making, and examine strategies to implement personalized medicine in clinical practice. Our research initiatives fall into three categories. First, understanding trends in personalized medicine and evaluating progress in healthcare that can inform further advancement of the field. Second, assessing the clinical and economic value of personalized medicine. And third, examining these clinical integration strategies. So now that we are demonstrating the value, how do we do it? How do we implement it? And a lot of healthcare providers need that kind of study, that kind of research to help move the field forward. Now, towards evaluating progress in healthcare, I will highlight one study, the integration of personalized medicine into healthcare, into the US healthcare system. A landscape analysis is a project that was designed to measure the progress of personalized medicine integration throughout the US health system at large, not just the early adopters and academic health centers and with well-funded research programs, but throughout the community of healthcare delivery systems in the United States. The landscape includes a representative sample of healthcare delivery institutions in the United States. And what we did here is we examined personalized medicine adoption in 5 clinical areas: oncology, rare and undiagnosed disease, and pharmacogenomics in particular, but also in prenatal screening and even in healthy patient screening. So the use of genomic sequencing or diagnostic tests to determine a healthy patient's risks and susceptibility to disease, not an often realized area within the clinic of personalized medicine. We developed a multifactorial adoption model and put it into our framework. And the adoption model was based on the collection of genomic and other types of data that inform personalized medicine treatment decisions, the testing parameters and guidelines at a healthcare delivery institution, and accessibility to test results, so data accessibility, as well as the utilization of data and the development of personalized medicine programs and leadership at an institution. From that adoption model, we looked at all of these things in the 5 health areas and developed an institution level personalized medicine adoption score from 1 to 5. And what was terrifically interesting here is that we found that by and large, most healthcare delivery institutions, from the smallest community hospital systems to the largest Mayo clinics and largest academic health centers and health delivery systems throughout the United States, that most healthcare delivery systems scored a 2 or greater, which was a pleasant finding for us because it shows that personalized medicine is being adopted at a measurable level pretty much across the United States. And that's good. However, we also found that only just over 20% of institutions were scoring a 4 or 5 on this scale. And that's where we want to get the entire health system. So we have a lot of work to do. And what we were able to do, because we had that adoption framework developed, is return the results to those institutions to show where they were scoring highly and where they weren't, so that we can inform their decision-making as they try to become greater adopters and implementers of personalized medicine. Regarding the second component of our research framework, assessing clinical and economic value, these studies are really designed to look at personalized medicine in clinical care and advance the evidence necessary to help payers and providers make decisions related to access to personalized medicine. So really to show the clinical and the economic value downstream of a personalized medicine approach. And it's my hope that this is of great interest to you at the University of Pittsburgh, because it shows the transition from all of the research and development of personalized medicine to its adoption and access to technologies and care. So I'm going to talk quickly about 3 projects that are in different areas, different disciplines, medical disciplines: oncology, rare and undiagnosed, and pharmacogenomics, because I think these are the 3 areas where we're seeing personalized medicine advance. I think they're the greatest interest to you, and where we can now develop evidence to show the health economic consequences of a personalized medicine approach. A lot of skeptics feel that by adding diagnostic testing to the healthcare paradigm, you might be increasing costs. But we are looking to see that the saved costs by improved outcomes are going to ultimately lead to population level improvements in cost effectiveness. So first, examining the clinical and cost effectiveness of genomic testing oncology, we worked with the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center looking at real world practice-based data from the Flatiron database to examine both the clinical improvements that might come from a genomic testing approach compared to single gene standard of care testing. And then we looked also at the cost effectiveness of this approach. Now, we found 2 important findings to mention here. First, despite an expanding body of evidence supporting the clinical utility of genetic testing, and our results showed that as well, that there's improved clinical outcomes that are associated with genomic testing, it remains vastly underutilized in clinical oncology practice. Also, we found that, yes, we do see sort of at a population level, mild clinical improvements in outcomes, as well as a small effect that shows a cost effectiveness. However, implementation challenges, associated implementation challenges, are mitigating this value. It could be much greater if we addressed some of the clinical practice gaps that are impeding the recognition of its value at a population level. Now, I'll point out that if you're a cancer patient or have a loved one who's a cancer patient and you have a targeted therapy that will work, that has great value to you. But these studies really look at it at a population level, so that we can make health system-wide determinations about the value of a personalized medicine approach. First, Latte Stoughton, who was at the Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center, and her group, including myself, showed that genomic testing increased the identification of actionable mutations in non-small cell lung cancer, and we did non-small cell lung cancer because that's where we had the most data. We also looked at melanoma and other cancer types as well, but it increased the identification of actionable mutations from 23% to over 30%. I'll point out that this data, which was published in 2019, was from 2017, from 2016 and 17. And since that time, there has been the development and FDA clearance of new therapies and diagnostic markers, which may increase the percentage of non-small cell lung cancer patients with an actionable mutation to over 70%. This includes the tumor mutational burden biomarker, which really shows that non-small cell lung cancer patients, above all, in my opinion, should be getting genomic testing, because as many as 70% of them will have an actionable mutation that can be identified. Still, knowing this, knowing that genomic testing improves the identification of actionable mutations, that actionable mutations and targeted treatments to those actionable mutations improve clinical outcomes, still only about 8 to 10% of US non-small cell lung cancer patients received genomic testing. Further, when we evaluated the cost effectiveness of a genomic sequencing approach compared to standard of care single gene testing, we found that only about 65 to 70% of patients with actionable mutations as determined by genomic testing actually got those targeted treatments. So this is that practice gap that Ed alluded to earlier, and that really becomes the focus of what we need to improve to better implement and realize the value of personalized medicine. We also showed that the current cost effectiveness ratio, now I'm not sure if you're familiar with cost effectiveness ratios, it's a health economics term, but basically an ICER, an incremental cost effectiveness ratio level of about $150,000 per life year is considered threshold for cost effectiveness. If you can spend $150,000 to get an additional quality life year, that's worth it. And we came up with a ICER level of just under 150,000 for the population of non-small cell lung cancers, lung cancer patients who receive genomic testing. This level, since this was a model, we were able to see if we had 100% adoption of the targeted therapies, this level would then decrease to a very clear cost effectiveness situation of 110,000 per life year. This really makes the case that if we can overcome these clinical barriers, these clinical practice gaps, we will be able to realize a great value in a genomic testing approach. Shifting to rare and undiagnosed disease, we also used the cost effectiveness modeling analysis for infants and all children with rare undiagnosed disease to look at a genomic sequencing approach compared to what's termed the diagnostic odyssey, where a child with an undiagnosed disease bounces around from health center to health center, often getting single gene testing and other phenotypic analysis to try to diagnose their disease, where we believe genomic sequencing can get to an answer sooner. We compared the standard of care testing to genomic sequencing and showed that indeed, under certain assumptions, the whole genome sequencing approach can even be cost saving for infants in the NICU and can improve health at a cost of about $120,000 per quality for all children. Now, these assumptions are based on how many patients will benefit from, will have a beneficial treatment that results from their testing results. Many children with rare and undiagnosed disease, they're so rare that even though they get a definitive diagnosis, there is no treatment available. But for when we estimate that about 15 to 20% of children in this situation that receive a definitive diagnosis will get a treatment that will now be available that will reduce their disability from a severe disability to either a moderate or a mild disability, or even sometimes to a full cure. Depending on how many patients that affects, we can see great value in the genomic sequencing approach. Finally, real quickly, the pharmacogenomic testing value proposition. Now in PGX, there are early indicators of improved value, but most decision makers are unaware of testing options, especially the payers. And there's been a reluctance to cover pharmacogenomic testing, but a study done by Coriell Life Sciences Enterprise for Pharmacogenomic Medication Safety Solution, working with the Teachers Retirement System of Kentucky, really shows a great value proposition here. Basically, Coriell offered pharmacogenomic testing for members of the Teachers Retirement System of Kentucky, which serves 35,000 retirees, 83% of which took medications with known drug-gene associations, pharmacogenomic associations. And they found that for that group that did accept the pharmacogenomic testing, there was a 17% reduction in cost of plan spending. They found a 29% reduction in hospitalizations for that group. and a 28% reduction in what's called MA3 events, that's medication adherence, appropriateness, and adversity. So people who weren't taking their medicine because it didn't work or it gave them lousy side effects, that stopped because we understood the pharmacogenomics ahead of time and we adjusted their prescriptions accordingly. It's great value, but this is still unclear to many decision makers, especially payers in the pharmacogenomic space. So the third tier of our research portfolio at PMC involves examining clinical integration strategies. And our efforts here are really meant to understand the challenges related to the use of personalized medicine in clinical practice and to help generate broad strategies and practices for implementation. Our hope is to build a roadmap that leads to the evolution of the healthcare delivery system to a personalized medicine paradigm, and all of the work that we're doing is part of it. And I want to highlight one study because I've talked a good deal about the practice gaps in non-small cell lung cancer, and Ed talked about them earlier in some of the examples that he highlighted. Now, as I mentioned, many patients do not receive targeted therapies, even if they are tested to have an actionable mutation. And more patients yet still do not ever get the biomarker testing needed to put them through a precision medicine pathway. So in oncology, again, we're looking at non-small cell lung cancer. We wanted to examine what was happening to those patients. Why were they dropping off? Why were they not going through this precision oncology pathway? And we looked at 7 different practice gaps and found out what percentage of patients we lost. And lo and behold, only about 36% of non-small cell lung cancer patients were successfully making it all the way through a precision oncology pathway and getting the best treatment available to them. This is in lung cancer, which is the most advanced, or one of the most advanced cancer types for precision medicine implementation. Yet we're still only seeing about 36% of patients getting through that precision oncology pathway today. This can be improved, and this is the example. This is the objective of this research. If you take a look at some of these gaps, if we can standardize biospecimen collection and testing processing, we can make a great impact and get this get results returned and more patients on targeted therapies. If we can improve the process for biomarker test ordering so that it becomes more standardized, if we can better implement the results and make sure that testing performance is delivered and positive test results are delivered in a timely manner to doctors, and with the appropriate clinical decision support, we can greatly improve the number of patients who get to targeted therapy. And finally, the treatment decision, if we can better make sure that doctors understand a biomarker testing approach and the value that it brings, and that reimbursement challenges are addressed, we can make sure we get closer to 100% of patients receiving a precision oncology approach. I certainly know, and I expect all of us, that if a loved one of ours were to be diagnosed with lung cancer, we would expect them to receive precision oncology so that they got the best treatment available to them. Many patients don't have the opportunity to be working in the personalized medicine field. They don't recognize it. This is what they face, and this is what we are here to try to overcome.
Daryl, thank you. Before I discuss what the future of personalized medicine might look like, I think now is a good time to break and see if there are any questions for either myself or Daryl.
Yeah, I'll open that up for questions if anyone has any questions to ask before we end this last slide.
I'm sure we must have said something controversial.
This is Malavika, and I have a question.
Yeah, Malavika.
Yes. So thank you for the wonderful talk, which was highly informative. So I have a question about the rare diseases that was mentioned in children. So my question is, how do you think the economic value could be created, especially in a condition where like only a small subset of children are being affected? I know you mentioned that there are conditions where at least 15 to 20% of kids or children are being affected in certain disease conditions. So is there any specific diseases you have in mind or that you have looked at or researched, where you think, like the economic value could be really created in developing a targeted therapy?
So we work with a number of partners, including patient organizations that are dealing with patient groups with rare and undiagnosed disease, rare and often undiagnosed disease. And the incidence of, since even though undiagnosed disease is often very, very rare, the incidence of, if you put it all together, the incidence of patients, babies born with a rare disease is quite high. It's as many as 5% of patients. So when we're looking for economic value, there's a couple of things that come forward. First is ending that diagnostic odyssey. If a patient doesn't know what their condition is, they bounce around from hospital system to hospital system trying to get a definitive diagnosis, and that costs. And not only does it cost money, but it costs a great deal of strife and stress for the family who's don't know it. When children are in the NICU, this is even greater because time is of essence. The second is if we can get them improved therapies that will help their condition. And as you just mentioned, Malvika, there's only about 15 to 20% of patients who have rare and undiagnosed disease that are going to have a treatment that's available to them. But that's going to cause economic gain because it's going to bring their costs down. And the final thing that we figured into this cost effectiveness study and is most important to the research community is by gaining more information, by doing genomic testing for all of these patients, we're going to diagnose more of them. And each of those are then added to different databases for the purposes of research and for clinical care. And as we get more and more patients, more information about their genomic background for each of these conditions, we will also know how better to develop treatments. It can be used for treatment development. It can also be used for treatment delivery. We'll have a better understanding of what may have worked better from one patient to the next. So there's great economic value to the whole health system in data sharing around rare disease and genomic testing.
Our point of entry into the study Daryl just mentioned was and is to justify the cost of genomic sequencing, to which there has been resistance. And we're trying to show that even if that costs, whether it's $1,000, it yields many benefits far beyond the original cost. So that's the mentality we're trying to address. And I think we've done that successfully. And PMC is not alone in that. There are other studies that show the economic value, never mind the clinical value of whole genome sequencing and other methods of sequencing.
Great, thank you.
Ed and Daryl, maybe I can ask a question. Daryl, you pointed out very clearly this challenge of that's in my area, the utilization in oncology of, if you don't utilize the test, you can't utilize the targeted therapy. And so we can't do personalized and precision medicine, and it starts at the top. And the challenge, I think, like you showed with that diagram at the end of the drop-off, is there are multiple stakeholders in that area, and they each have different values, and they often aren't aligned. And we work a lot on this, on trying to, disentangle that web and trying to figure out. I wonder, if you guys have a kind of feeling on what the main areas you would do then to try and overcome that. What would you say if you say the top one or top three things you could do to try and break down those barriers of what's a complex kind of organizational challenge?
I'm going to let Daryl answer this question because he's actually written a paper.
Right, and writing a paper that really gets to just this, Adrian. We want to not only we would like to address all of those practice gaps, but we want to have the greatest impact right away. So perhaps when we think about what we can do right away, there are a couple of areas that really come to mind. First is standardizing laboratory processing. It really is a shame to see that biospecimens were collected and then the test was sent to a laboratory and the sample was mishandled, or the test was said to have enough tumor cell content and it didn't. That these processes, even though somewhat recognized as needing standardization, are not yet standardized in a way that kind of can eliminate the problem, or at least optimize the processing there. That, I think, is a low-hanging fruit, but saying the low-hanging fruit, that's developing the policy. The hard part is developing the processing. The second thing I would say is, on the other end of it, it's the reimbursement challenges. So we've talked to payers a great deal, and they do not, even though they don't always cover testing, especially genomic sequencing for lung cancer, they don't want to be an additional barrier. They see the improved value you'd get if you could get targeted therapies to the appropriate patients. They don't want to be an additional barrier, but they're seeing its misuse, targeted therapies misuse. So if we can tighten that up and make the case so that that reimbursement challenge disappears, or that reimbursement challenge is minimized, we'll see a great deal more patients, a lot more doctors prescribing targeted therapies for their patients with actionable mutations.
Are there any other questions? I think we still have 5 minutes. Well, yeah. Let me just conclude then by saying that I'm optimistic about the future of personalized medicine because there's so much developing scientific knowledge about genetics, proteomics, metabolomics, imaging, not to mention the artificial intelligence opportunities that we've yet to harvest. And all of these opportunities suggest that we will be able in the future, especially if we get our systems aligned, to personalize treatments and thereby make them more effective. I expect that with the development of drugs that were noted at the beginning, that going from of targeted drugs, going from 5 to 300 today, will continue. The cost of diagnostic testing on DNA sequencing is going down. That should make linking diagnostics to therapy more affordable and therefore more available. And I'm pretty certain that these new discoveries are going to play an increasing important role in drug development and patient care. The question is, how quick is all this going to happen? And I think that if we invest in making it happen, it'll obviously happen faster, but we have work to do. It's cut out for us. Next slide, please. Daryl, thanks. The issue is not, in fact, whether we have a choice. Biology is determined we don't have a choice. Biology is determined that people are different, and that we've got to work with that, whether we like it or not. And so Barbara Weber, who is was a president of a diagnostic company in Boston, funded by a venture capital group called Third Rock, said it at one of our conferences, and I haven't forgotten this, and I like to refer to it, that we really don't have a choice. We don't get to decide what the biology of these diseases are. We just have to work with it. And she's coming at that as a clinician, and Daryl and I are coming at that as from a policy perspective, that we've just got to figure this out if we want to make medical progress. It's not a one-off situation where some discovery leads to, and there's no magic bullet here. We got to understand that biology is complex and figure out how to move the system to what we call personalized medicine. And I would just conclude with a final quote from Machiavelli about why progress is slow. It's slow. Machiavelli reminded us not discussing medicine, but discussing change, that there's nothing more difficult, he said, than to take the lead in the introduction of a new order of things. For the reformer has enemies in all who profit from the old order. I think that's what Adrian was referring to. And only lukewarm defenders in all those who would profit from the new order. This indifference arises partly from the fear of their adversaries and partly from the incredulity of mankind, who do not believe in anything new until they've had actual experience of it. The good news is we have had actual experience of personalized medicine making a difference, especially in cancer, and it gives us cause for optimism. And with that, I would like to thank you again for the opportunity to make this presentation, and also to say in conclusion, we look forward to working with the University of Pittsburgh, especially in advancing personalized or precision medicine. So we're a bottom-up organization, and we encourage you to, all of people on this call and people not on this call at the University of Pittsburgh to get involved with us. So thank you again, Adrian and Jenny, very much.
Thanks, Ed. Ed, on that note, maybe I can ask the final question, because there is a question in the chat and it relates to what you just said on the final note about the interaction with the Personalized Medicine Coalition. So there's a question from Xinghua Lu, who's a data scientist who's developing AI tools. Hey, Xinghua. And
hi.
I was going to paraphrase, and so his question in the chat, maybe I can just paraphrase it, was how could he use your organization to try and help him extend his tools into real world or look at real world data, etc.
Well, we are working on the issue of real world data and getting real world data integrated into decision making. We have a data working group, and we'll send you a white paper we just published that lays out the issues as we see them, especially the concern about privacy and protecting innovation, and how those two things might conflict. But it's a prime focus of one of the ad hoc work groups of the Personalized Medicine Coalition. And we'll be sure to send you that paper and also invite your participation in our working group on that subject. We're only as strong as our membership, as I said at the beginning, and we're a bottom-up organization responsive to your insights and concerns. And then we'd like to think that as a collective, we have a stronger voice with the agencies, with Congress, and with the medical establishment in bringing about the changes we would like, especially as you note in data, which has yet to really have an impact as much as it could, and as much as it has in other fields. But there are some real problems, and we have to address them. Daryl, do you want to add anything?
Only that with AI in particular, we are we're working on a project to understand disparities in healthcare research and personalized medicine research and data associated with it. And AI really brings opportunities, but also brings the added challenge that if the data collected that is being analyzed by the AI algorithm has inequities or disparities in care from underrepresented populations, that can be, there could be a snowball effect that can be propagated into the results of the AI algorithm. So we want to make sure we're working with AI scientists, people who understand the technology better, so that we can address that before we see those types of things happen. We want to make sure, it's our mantra that personalized medicine isn't personalized medicine unless it's personalized to all. And we don't want to leave anybody out. We don't want to any learned computer learning programs to exemplify problems with disparities in research.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Yeah, this is a really wonderful talk. I think we are doing this kind of research, and we believe we can develop this kind of tool, but it's also how we can really go through certain kind of mechanism to bring them to real world is always a challenge. Just like you mentioned, many challenges of how to bring this to the practice, right? So I just wonder, maybe later on I'll get in touch to see if your organization have a mechanism to facilitate this kind of research. First, for example, we contact the Fred IANs trying to get their data, publish the data to validate their result, but still have some challenges to really get access to data. We also have some tools so potentially can bring to the real world to have some use. So, but also need to work on how to bring them to the real world too. Yeah.
Yeah, I should say as well, we have circulated your group around, and there's people interested from the policy side, from the disparities in rural access side, from many of those. So we're trying to get a list together of people who would be interested in some of those, participating in some of those committees. So I want to thank you again, Ed and Daryl, for the hour. It was fantastic, and I think we're gonna, we'll continue the conversation offline as we put our people forward.
Great. Thank you very much, Adrian.
Thank you, Adrian. Thank you,
Thank
Jenny.
you.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Bye.